defeats or in the historical battle that happened last time out for the Weather Hills. This, however, is not a historical battle, and indeed I don't believe these two particular fragments of old Arnor ever actually met in, at least not a battle of this scale. I'm not sure, but I really don't think that Arthedain and Cardolan came to blows in the same way that both of these two did against Rudauer due to Angmar's influence, but maybe I'm wrong about that. That is something which maybe I do neglect a little bit in terms of my knowledge of what actually happened in Middle-earth. It's easy to generalise on these things, and Middle-earth is one of those fairly rare examples where exhaustive detail does go into this sort of thing, so I won't claim to know too much on that particular topic. But we are going to be seeing Arthedain take on Cardolan here, and they're going to be attempting to take this settlement, which of course is in the mould of a standard Medieval 2 settlement, albeit with the architecture that was added when Third Age was first being conceived. And that's going to be interesting, and I do quite like the fact that we're seeing a little bit more in terms of the baseline Medieval 2 settlements lately. It's a little bit nostalgic, especially seeing as, certainly in the earlier days of my channel, it was this kind of settlement which made up most of these kind of battles, albeit with the dearth of fully custom settlements that we've seen in the time since. They have become significantly less common, but it's nice to mix a few in every now and then, and of course with the game being mechanically designed around settlements being this way, you could definitely make the argument for saying that this is how the game is best balanced, though with the different balancing that goes into the units in Third Age, that perhaps isn't quite so perfectly true as it may have been in the baseline game. But Cardolan are going to be on the defence here. I'm sure that I can come up with an adequate settlement that this would fit for, as Arthedain try to bring their unruly younger brother perhaps to heel here. We shall see. But this one was sent to me by one of the attackers today, Tommy the Wise, who has actually sent me a few battle replays at this point. We've already seen one of them by now, by the time this one comes out, but he sent me a few that we will be seeing in the coming weeks as well to help see out 2022. He's going to be on the attack today playing as one of the Arthedainian forces. So he's got some Evendim Spearmen with the armour upgrade here, which, as far as militia units go, the Evendim Spearmen are one of the best all-round militia units in the game. Especially considering the fact that when they have their armour upgraded like this, they don't really resemble militiamen at all, but more mainline spears, though in terms of stats that is somewhat misleading. They still won't be able to mix it with, for example, fully upgraded Gondorian spearmen, even though they may look equivalent based on the gear that they have. But generally speaking, for the cost, for their effectiveness, decent against warding off cavalry as well, which may very well come into play here against Cardolan's Lancers. They are a very good choice for pushing up the ram, decently survivable as well. Cardolan are the sort of force, however, which do have certain infantry units which are going to be really, really effective against them. Anything armour piercing, for example, we shall see. Then we have some upgraded Arthedain and men-at-arms, both levels of armour upgrade as well, which is fairly expensive for Arthedain to engage in for a unit which is ultimately very run-of-the-mill in terms of the balance of the game. But it will help them against arrow fire and the like, which when you're on the attack in this sort of situation is always going to be a useful trait to have. And it will make it more likely that they're going to be able to defeat the equivalent Minhiriath units, which of course cannot have their armour upgraded. But then again, that also means that you can't dump more money than would be necessary into them. But I do think that the armour upgrade, it kind of depends really on how much ammunition Cardolan commit to killing off units like this at range. Because I do feel like in melee and with certain other units as well, Cardolan have got the armour piercing tools to deal with this kind of thing in melee, but they're not overly expensive even with the armour upgrade, so they should make for a decent workhorse here as the first wave of Arthedain comes forward. Another one pushing up siege towers here. Obviously with this kind of settlement, blanketing the walls with siege towers or knocking a few holes in the wall is the first port of call. Evendim Spearmen pushing up this siege tower, so Tommy the Wise has clearly put some thought into this with the fact that he's got several siege towers ready to go. DUNEDAIN Peacekeepers are an interesting choice as well. Obviously their high base damage makes them fantastic against more numerous armies, given the fact that they often lack a little bit in terms of their overall quality, which allows the extra damage from those axes to really pay dividends. Should be pretty good against Cardolan. Cardolan do have the armour values to resist some of the damage that they're chucking out, but the DUNEDAIN core of units that Arthedain have is certainly bigger than that of Cardolan, and it is one of the ways in which they can really impress their quality on them in melee. And against the standard Minhiriath units as well, the Peacekeepers will have more than enough to win any one-to-ones that certainly crop up. But even with the armour that these DUNEDAIN wear and with their round shields, they are still a little bit more vulnerable than you would like perhaps to projectiles and stuff like crossbows. It's not really going to matter either way. They will be a good target for Cardolan to go after in that regard. Tommy also has a catapult over here, which you could save for later on when the street fighting gets underway, but there's no guarantee you'll get a good shot. I always think on this kind of medieval 2 settlement, it's worth at least committing a portion of your ammunition to knocking a few holes in the wall, because it's a little bit more reliable to go through on ground level and try to claim the walls via your siege towers, depending on how the defenders will approach it. We have some dismounted Fornost Rhine Knights, very similar to the Dunedain Peacekeepers in terms of what they offer, the difference being that they do a little bit more damage with those big two-handed swords of theirs, but they do lack the round shield, so they don't have the same missile resistance that the Dunedain Peacekeepers we've already spoken about have, so that's worth bearing in mind, but still a unit which Cardolan are not particularly going to enjoy going toe-to-toe with in melee, and other units of them over there as well. Wardens of the North, another Dunedain class unit which Cardolan don't really have an equivalent to. This does go both ways, as I'm sure we shall see when we get into the Cardolan roster, but the Wardens of the North, not only are they fantastic heavy swordsmen in melee, but they have those steel bows which of course loose armor-piercing arrows. Positioning is going to be fairly key here for the Wardens of the North. Can they get into a good position to rain that damage down upon some of Cardolan's more important units? We shall have to wait and see, but if they can be used in that regard, then it's going to be a really, really strong tool for them. Dunedain Troll Slayers are also a very scary unit in a siege like this. They're multiple HP, armor piercing at range and in melee, very, very good all-round damage dealers, especially against factions that do lean a bit more heavily on armor, which Cardolan of course do. The downside to them is the fact that while they can hide anywhere, when you're on the attack like this, you can't keep them hidden. You're going to have to move them into the danger zone at some point, and if Cardolan are doing their due diligence, they should be ready to shoot them down, because this is really one of the more dangerous units that Arthedain have in their arsenal against Cardolan. We have a mounted division as well. The Grey Company, of course, body-piercing projectiles, and this is one of those rare occasions where they will actually be keeping their body-piercing moving into the next patch. Mounted Rangers will be, which means Arthedain, Harad, and one other faction which escapes me at the moment will be able to maintain that kind of damage. Easier to use on the defence though, it must be said, and considering the fact that Cardolan will be trying to contest the cavalry game with Arthedain here, I'm not sure whether this is going to go the way that Arthedain wants it to, but later on, if they still have them alive, those body-piercing projectiles could be absolutely devastating. And let's not forget as well that when it comes down to an outright cavalry brawl, Arthedain do have advantages over Cardolan. Cardolan are all about lances and doing damage. They don't really have any anti-cavalry as such. The Knights of Illuminus, though, are fantastic at that for Arthedain. Not only do they have the high charge bonus of those lances, but also the anti-cavalry bonus of being knights, and they are the tankiest of these heavy knights that the game has to offer as well. And then at the back, finally, we have a couple of units of Arthedain pikemen with the armour upgrade, with their breastplate, so they will be a little bit more resilient to any arrow fire that Cardolan decide to send their way. But being at the back, that's a good move, I think, because the later they can commit these pikes, Arthedain, I think the better it will be. Cardolan may necessitate their committal earlier, depending on how they build their lines, because they may not be able to do without them on the front line to combat the enemy pikes, we shall see. The next Arthedain army, we have Y2K86, who has also got a rather large amount of Evandem spearmen here. Again, we've already spoken about why they should be fairly efficient, at least in the first few waves. Cardolan will have to commit decent units to stop them, but they're not absolutely vital to the Arthedainian war effort as the battle wears on. He too has decided to fully upgrade his Arthedain men-at-arms, presumably for the same reason. It gives them a little bit of an edge against the equivalent Cardolan units if it does come down to pure melee, but also it makes them more resilient against those pesky arrows, which are definitely going to be coming their way. A couple of units of dismounted Fornost Knights as well. So again, them and the Dunedain Peacekeepers going to be delivering a good amount of damage in the central infantry corps for Arthedain. Instead of going more heavily in for the cavalry, perhaps he has gone for some dismounted Knights of Illuminus as well. This is going to offer a very nice high-tier bodyguard unit for when the going gets a little bit grindier in the streets, perhaps. This is the kind of unit which can last for a long time under a great deal of pressure. Not maybe the best damage-dealing bodyguard unit that the game has to offer, but still very, very strong. And has got a lot of staying power. Arthedain pikemen once again with the armour upgrades. A little bit further back, we have the Wardens of the North. Going for a trebuchet is an interesting choice. I mean, it means you can be a little bit further away. It can do far more damage as well to blobs of infantry, but like I said, when it comes to artillery like this, I do think you're best off committing at least a portion of the ammunition it offers to knocking a few holes in the wall. And in fact, in Y2K's case, because he has neglected to bring siege towers at all, he's going to need to use his trebuchet perhaps entirely for knocking holes in the wall. I don't think he's even got rams, which is a bit of an oversight on his part. Grey Company and Mounted Knights of Illuminus once again making up a cavalry force. Over on the other side of the settlement we have Joran, who has decided to go for some Dunedain scouts instead. They don't have the body piercing of the Grey Company, but neither are they as expensive. I don't know how effective standard horse archers are going to be for the attackers in this kind of situation. Maybe they're hoping to help whittle down its cavalry sallying out of the settlement, so we'll see if that proves to be, if Joran proves to be up to the task of doing that, because Cardolan most certainly will attempt that. Full line of Evandin spearmen once again, so they're going to be relying on this workhorse militia spearman in the early stages of the game at the very least. The first Arthedain army as well that we've seen so far to bring along the Illuminous Gate Guards, which I think is a little bit surprising given the fact that they are an upper tier unit. Pikes as the battle wears on. This is exactly the kind of unit which can make life very, very difficult for the opposing team, whether you're the attackers or the defenders. They are fairly expensive though, and they do represent one of those very clear targets for Cardolan to go after. It's very clear where they are as well with those blue capes of theirs. Catapult in behind, already in position to fire. Need to make sure they don't hit that windmill. Arthedain marksmen. This is perhaps something else which the other Arthedainian attacking armies have neglected a little bit. They're not intending on skirmishing with the enemy quite so much, but then again on these standard medieval 2 siege maps it's a little bit more difficult for the attackers to actually utilise their archers in that way than it would be in some of the more custom maps that we've seen made in the past, which is an interesting little design thing, which maybe we can compare what Creative Assembly were doing back in the day to what players making maps are doing now and how that affects the mechanics. But these Arthedain marksmen will trade evenly, of course, with the equivalent Cardolan units. We have yet more Dunedain peacekeepers, so a heavy Dunedain presence in this battle. Dunedain troll slayers, more dismounted knights of Illuminus and wards of the north, so all very high tier units indeed. Interesting to see no rangers from Arthedain so far. They could be hidden, but maybe that's not the worst thing to leave them at home. Some Arthedain pikemen as well, a full line of them, and some Evandin spearmen also. The final Arthedainian army going to be played by DF Mark. He's gone for some Arthedain pikemen as well, albeit without the armour upgrade here, so just the chain and tabards for them. Like I said, I don't really think that the armour upgrade does help against projectiles, but it's still one of the most clear targets for enemy archers that the Arthedain roster has, and everyone knows Arthedain have got strength in their pikemen, so I don't know how much value you necessarily get out of that armour anyway. Dismounted Fornos Knights and Dunedain Peacekeepers here in force as well. He has decided not to go for armour upgrades throughout his entire army by the looks of things. Standard Arthedain and man-at-arms, so they're going to be very much equivalent to the Cardolan units, which I'm sure we shall see shortly. We have some more dismounted Fornos Knights there, more men-at-arms here in high numbers, Dunedain Troll Slayers, Arthedain Pikemen, so all of the attacking armies have got an artillery piece. That's going to be fairly painful for the defenders. It means that the walls are going to be crumbled and they're going to be under constant bombardment really. Trebuchet over here, you can see that DF Mark's angle of the settlement already has got a little bit more terrain perhaps as well, which can be a blessing and a curse for artillery. Illuminous Gate Guards, Dunedain Scouts, Troll Slayers and Wards of the North, so very similar armies perhaps as you would expect. Now then, defending forces, we have the Warlord, one of the Cardolan armies, Greenway Garrison Footmen and Spearmen. Greenway Garrison Footmen are going to be lower tier than the Arthedainian Pikemen, but they're also cheaper, and all they really need to do is stand in the way and hold the line and keep Arthedain at arm's length as best they can for other units to do the business, so perhaps that cheaper cost is going to help them out fairly substantially. Some civilians to help gum up the works of the streets, and we have some more Greenway units, we have some bandits, a lot of lower end entry level units so far, so I can only assume that the Warlord has got some very high tier units lurking around here somewhere as well. Bandits of course being javelins, which can be very, very useful against Arthedain, but again positioning is going to be absolutely everything there. Dunedain Rangers, not surprising to see Rangers on the defence. I think this is going to be one of the crutches that Cardolan are going to have to rely upon here, along with their crossbowmen. You can see Minhiriath Sharpshooters and Men-at-Arms Roman Gatekeepers, so this trifecta of units going to be vital to the defenders' chances of winning this, body-piercing projectiles and armour-piercing projectiles. Because if it comes down to pure melee, I really do think Arthedain have got a bit of an edge over Cardolan in this matchup, outside of a couple of individual units which can't be brought in great numbers. Minhiriath Men-at-Arms and Spears are very, again, run-of-the-mill. They can hold the line decently enough, especially with the cheap pike support that Cardolan can muster. But it's not a match-winning combination, it is just a functional line that can hold for a little while. Ingamar being one of the other Cardolan armies, with more gatekeepers, some footmen, and more men-at-arms as well already, as well with Minhiriath Sharpshooters, using The layout of the streets to prevent enemy infantry from closing in on you is going to be important here as well for the defenders. Greenway Garrison spearmen lurking in the streets. This is obviously militia spears, and in terms of their melee prowess, they are significantly weaker really than the Evendim spearmen of Arthedain. But once again, they're just here to hold the line. They do have a better resistance to missiles, but as we've already spoken about really, the only missiles that have been brought in great numbers are the Wardens of the North, and their added resistance isn't really going to help them there. Mercenary crossbowmen is an interesting choice. They're not really going to be up to much if they decide to sally out, because the Dunedain scouts and the Grey Company will rip them apart, but if they stay within the settlement and be used as auxiliary crossbows, maybe late on they can use their horses aggressively. Maybe that's the way. Minhiriath men-at-arms here also, Minhiriath spearmen, more Greenway Garrison footmen, defending artillery, which they obviously will not have to use it on their own walls, so catapult going to be very important for trying to equalise that melee fight a little bit. They've got some Greenway Garrison archers, which can be used for skirmishing and also doing damage to infantry, but of course not nearly to the same volume as Minhiriath sharpshooters and rangers can. Got some Greenway Garrison spearmen in and amongst them. We also have some Wardens of Tirn Gorthan, very much the equivalent to the Numinous Gate Guards, of course. These guys with red capes. The morale boosting effects actually don't work in this version of the game, but in the next version they will, so they'll be even stronger come the next patch. The Tharbad Warhammers, though, are going to be the best Cardolan infantry unit against Arthedain, just full stop, really, because of that huge armour piercing that they have. Especially the basic Arthedain units are going to really struggle against the punishment that the Tharbad Warhammers can mete out. But like I said, they can't be brought in huge numbers, so Cardolan can only rely upon them to a certain point. We also have some Greenway Garrison footmen from Zelhain here, which is a fairly new name, I think, up here on the walls, with a unit of pikes. We have got some Minhiriath sharpshooters. 2 units of Royal Court of House of the Rondor. I'm very interested to see how a potentially newer player utilises this kind of unit, because if he sallies out and is unthinking about it, the Knights of Annúminas are superior to them in melee. So, again, this could be potentially a very costly mistake. We'll see. I mean, it could pay off massively, but it could also backfire in a big way. Hearthguard of Amon-Sul, very dependable spears in melee, good at dealing damage at range as well, but a slow burn of a unit this. We have plenty of footmen ready to clog up the gatehouses, more spearmen, more men-at-arms gatekeepers. We have a catapult, Greenway Garrison spearmen, a ton more Minhiriath men-at-arms. Like I said, these Minhiriath units cannot upgrade their armour, so this is what you get with them. It does mean that Arthedain can put their own equivalent units slightly ahead of them in terms of quality, but, you know, again, functional, they'll do the job, but other units are going to have to really go above and beyond, like the sharpshooters here, which we've seen a lot of crossbows from Cardolan. And let's not forget, the Minhiriath sharpshooters are also very useful in melee as mace men, so the fact they brought so many of them, Diego, Rio, Ramos here rounding off the 4 Cardolan players, is a good choice, I think, because not only are you going to be able to do a withering amount of damage at range, but they're also going to actually be probably slightly better than the standard Minhiriath units in melee at dealing with these basic Cardolan forces. Dunedain captains, we've seen heavy swordsmen. Cardolan may have less Dunedain units to pick from than Arthedain, but they are still very much around. Dunedain commanders, we've seen them be actually pretty good of late, but I feel like they're going to bite off more than they can chew against the might of Arthedain's knights, and then plenty of footmen as well. I mean, plenty of numbers for Cardolan on the defence here. These Greenway units are definitely going to stand in the way, but is the quality of Cardolan going to be enough? I'm not sure. Captains, Dunedain Rangers again going to be important, hidden behind the tower, so they try and avoid that artillery hit. Wardens of Tirn Gorthad once again, and rounding things off, some Minhiriath spearmen and more Greenway units, and potentially a few units on the way up here as well. Another artillery piece as well. Interesting to see a ballista. I don't know whether the angles are going to be on the Warlord's side here, but it could pay off. Ballista can be very, very damaging, but you need to... Positioning is more important with a ballista than it is with a catapult or trebuchet. More crossbows, and in the town centre, a final stand with some Tharbad Warhammers and some Wardens of Tirn Gorthad, with some Tharbad Riders as well, which of course are a fantastic glass cannon cavalry unit because they have the same charge as knights, but morale-wise and physically they're far more fragile, in and amongst a bunch of civilians as well. So, I think we'll go this way because the catapult is already firing upon the walls. Without further ado, let's get this show on the road, shall we? So one thing that I am going to be quite interested to see here is the interplay between the artillery, to be honest, because of the amount that certainly the attackers have, but the defenders also have got a fair amount of their own, and it's not a flat settlement either, so it may very well be the kind of situation where positioning for the defenders can really make or break their efforts. So that wall is going to fall apart pretty quickly, though it must be said they've also demolished a windmill for no good reason. Very unfortunate. But the cavalry so far not going to be committed early by Cardolan, and I think that's probably for the best based on the amount of Arthedainian cavalry that there is. Like I said, the Royal Court of House Thorondor really don't find themselves trading favourably with the Knights of Numinas, so they're going to need to bide their time here and use their cavalry in the late game, I think. Now that's very unfortunate. You can see that several of the Men-at-Arms Roman gatekeepers that are on that section of wall just got flung off it, and yeah, not brilliant from a defending perspective already. The Tharvad riders are also coming up. I mean, it is a lot of cavalry. If they gang up on one particular army, that has been in the past how we've seen defensive cavalry sallying out early used to its most effective. And here we have sharpshooters firing away. Tommy the Wise sending over a couple of dismounted Fornosterine knights over to this section as well, but so far very content to just knock a few holes in the wall for the time being, and that's very understandable. And the gate guards moving across, catapult moving as well. One gap in the front line for the one gap in the walls for the moment. Grey Company are here. I mean, the Grey Company front and centre is an interesting choice. Definitely you want the knights in the way of them. Just as we're about to see a cavalry clash, of course, we get one of the little movies of the wall crumbling. Doing the right thing though here, Diego, by trying to avoid an outright confrontation with the Knights of Numinas, although they're going to get up to charge speed here and they're going to surely clip the back of the Royal Court. One of the riders gets caught out from that. The Tharvad rider is going to really take one for the team here. I think actually it might be a good idea to go down to half speed, at least temporarily, while this is going on. I mean, they will do a decent amount of damage off the charge, actually. And you can see a few of the Knights of Numinas did get skewered. That is what the Tharvad riders have in the locker. And with only one unit of knights, and with all of the Cardolan cavalry coming over here, you can see, trying to go after the catapult crew. Tommy, I think, saw that this was going to transpire, and so has moved some pikes over here. They didn't quite get there in time to stop the first charge, but not all of the catapult crew will die as a result of this, and that's the important thing. It means they will continue to do their thing. All Knights of Numinas are over there. Tharvad riders being left alone by the Knights of Numinas, actually, and that is going to mean that these dismounted Fornosterine knights are also going to get skewered. Yeah, maybe not the most bruising charge, that, but it is going to kill off a few more of these very valuable higher end infantry units. What have we got here? The first ram to be pushed up to the gatehouse is the F Mark, a much more standardised siege battle over here taking place as the Arthedainians slowly poke a few more holes in the wall, move their ram forward first, and then almost certainly they will begin the assault in earnest. Joran moving his catapult in to get a better shot so he's not hitting some of the structures around the outer part of the settlement. Some dead Royal Court over here. And with the pikes, it's going to be difficult for Cardolan, but then that's the nature of things. The infantry for Arthedain are in support of superior cavalry, and also with the Wardens of the North firing away at the Royal Court. I mean, they are a tanky unit of cavalry, if nothing else, but those armour-piercing arrows going to be a real problem. The Grey Company are there. Are they actually going to stand in the way of the Wardens of the North? I don't know. I mean, you can see here several of them are going to fall. They are going to get in the way, I think, which is fairly bold. I mean, the armour-piercing arrows are now not really going to be in a position to hit the Royal Court directly. Certainly worth bearing in mind. And the Grey Company themselves will not do quite so well against heavy cavalry like this in melee. The first of the gates battered through. Another section of wall. So I mean, they are doing the right thing here, the attackers, by systematically exposing the defenders. The Royal Court are struggling a little bit here, and they have got nowhere near enough damage done. The Cardolan cavalry, I think, interestingly enough, the Tharbad riders have probably been the ones punching above their weight a little bit more so, but now that they're under fire from the Warns of the North as well, things are going to be getting a little bit dicey, you would suggest. And considering Tommy is managing to phase out the cavalry that is attacking his position reasonably well. Very nice indeed. With each volley from those steel bows, more of those heavy cavalrymen do fall. Over in this section of the battlefield, Joran continuing to also push forward now that the two sections of wall have crumbled. Interestingly enough, not going after the gatehouse directly here. But the section of the battlefield settlement maybe is a little bit more exposed when you look at it like this, because it's harder to reinforce this area than it is the gatehouse, which has got a direct route to the town centre. Maybe that's the thinking, or maybe it's just coincidence. This, I think, is going to be actually a fairly violent and fast siege once all of these holes are made. I don't think there's going to be a lot of messing around from Arthedain once that happens. For better or worse, from their perspective, the battle will sort itself out reasonably quickly. It's going to be a real test of Cardolan's infantry staying power, but also a test of whether Arthedain can withstand a withering array of range damage, the crossbows in particular, given the amount of sharpshooters that are on display, still just being chased away, and the Tharbad riders as well. Fairly likely, as a cavalry unit goes, to rout. Royal Court of House Thorondor are now routing. They'll go back to the town centre, but they'll play really no useful further part in this battle. The ram actually caught fire. Y2K's lack of siege equipment, that's probably why Tommy the Wise came over here in the first place with some reinforcements, so that he could set up some siege equipment and also knock down the gate with the ram. But it's not going to happen now. The ram burnt to cinders and crumbling. Tommy also going to move forward now from here, although I think what we're going to be seeing here, the first melee engagements in this section of the battlefield where there wasn't a lot of cavalry into play. Arthedain men-at-arms will be just fine against basic civilians, of course, and I don't really know what Cardolan are hoping to achieve by this. If they send forward civilians on their lonesome, I don't think it's going to end all that well for them. They're going to need some support coming in here. I mean, they do have the Minhiriath sharpshooters and the bandit javelins. Slowly doing some damage. I mean, they don't have the best of shots here. Angle of fire is less of a problem for the javelins, but for the crossbows, are they going to be going after stuff like the Arthedain pikemen? We'll have to wait and see. Joran, with the attack getting underway here, I think Joran should also be thinking about moving in now and giving his ally a bit of a helping hand on the periphery. DUNEDAIN peacekeepers from DF Mark actually pushing up the ram as well, so did he have rams? Maybe not. Maybe Joran also didn't remember to bring rams as well, but it doesn't matter. His ally will do that job for him, and then surely the attack will begin. Greenway Garrison spearmen moving out, presumably in an attempt to block cavalry from moving forward. There's a lot of dead men-at-arm rolling gatekeepers. There's a few dead Ebendim spears over here as well. But it's very unfortunate that Zelhain lost so many of his men-at-arm units. Very, very important, of course, and with some stray catapult shots also killing some of the Greenway units that are still waiting for the Arthedain advance to begin in earnest. Tommy the Wise, see on the mini-map that the ram is still doing its thing. So we've got some mercenary crossmen from Ingamar, being a little bit more patient with that, which is good to see. Gwathlo trackers revealing themselves, Greenway Garrison archers. They won't mind too much about this. They are going to lose ultimately to the Arthedain marksmen, but bringing a unit of cheaper archers like this would be exactly the sort of role that Cardolan were going to use them for, I would assume. Tommy the Wise batters that gate down, and DF Mark batters the north gates down as well. Well, actually, no, not the north gate. What am I talking about? The west gate. This, however, is the north, and Arthedain. This is the one area where the Arthedainian infantry is really starting to push in against the Cardolan forces. Dunedain Troll Slayers now also getting in position to support this superior infantry force with the trying to bank some artillery shots, and Joran there giving his ally a helping hand. I have to say, I'm not certain Cardolan have really set up in the way I would have recommended here. It's going to come down largely to how much damage they can get done with the supporting range units, but given how those Minhiriath sharpshooters were just butchered by those Troll Slayers, and now they're going to get engaged in melee by infantry as well, it's going to be an uphill slog from Cardolan from here if they want to force Arthedain back to the walls. More crossbow bolts arcing in. Further over here, Minhiriath spearmen, some Greenway garrison footmen as well, but the pikes aren't really going to help them here because of the pressure that they're under, and also Arthedain have got pikes of their own which are of slightly higher quality, so it's not going to end too well for Cardolan here. And still, that support from those artillery hits, a bit of friendly fire there actually, but for the most part they have been hitting the Greenway garrison footmen just fine. Again, we'll have to go down to half speed, at least temporarily, I think, given how the battle is developing. Victory seems certain. That's a bit of unfortunate friendly fire, that. And Arthedain men-at-arms are certainly the kind of unit that could rout if you're not too careful. For the good initial work that the artillery is doing, it's now doing more damage to Mark's infantry push than good. You can see over here, Arthedain men-at-arms and dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights are actually struggling a little bit here, and much of that has to do with the Cardolan pikes. As I've always said, cheap pikes can really help you punch above your weight if you're dealing with some higher quality infantry units than your own, and it's definitely something that Cardolan often have to rely upon, with their infantry being what it is. Although with the Dunedain Troll Slayers ready to do some damage, I can't imagine this is going to be happening for the long haul in this fight. Another section of wall crumbles. Maybe a little bit of a lopsided affair so far though, with one player going pretty aggressively in at this point. Tommy the Wise and Y2K maybe still lagging behind their allies a little bit. Joran somewhere between the two. A lot of dead Minhiriath sharpshooters over here. Could that have been as a result of the Grey Company, perhaps? You can see here that many of these siege towers as well, burning wrecks now, those arrow towers that the settlement have, really doing their work. You can of course destroy them fairly easily with a single catapult volley, but they've decided to go for crumbling sections of wall, which is not necessarily the wrong thing to do, but you just have to understand that it's going to make life far more difficult for the siege towers to actually get into place. Most of the siege towers he has brought are now wrecks on the field. Indeed, Y2K didn't have any in the first place, so maybe they're going to be able to hold on to the walls for a little bit longer. That elevation on those crossbows, could that be a significant thing? Evendon Spearmen. This is a little bit of an oversight here from Ingemar. Pulling back from the wall is all well and good, but they have now allowed the Dunedain peacekeepers to get up onto the wall and engage with the Manatar-Roman gatekeepers. Not only that, but we're also seeing arrow fire. Many of the arrows you can see breaking on the stonework of the walls, but they are going to get away. But they are also now going to have to deal with the fact that Arthedain have effectively taken this section of wall, and they will now also be able to use superior elevation. Another section of wall falls. Cardolan have managed to shore up their front lines again, and once again with the pikes doing the business. You can see that there are bodyguard tier units in there as well. The dismounted Knights of Illuminus, some Troll Slayers are also going to try and filter their way to the front line, but it is going to mostly be a case of those mercenary crossbows, also those Gwathlo trackers as well, doing some good range damage, and it's not the sort of thing that Arthedain are going to be able to sustain for an indefinite period of time, this. Arthedain men-at-arms pushing forwards. Still these pockets of Cardolan resistance are fighting. Cardolan's morale being what it is also a potential concern in this sort of situation where large sections of their force could end up routing more quickly than other forces might, but for the time being that hasn't really reared its ugly head. And here spears are shaken though, unsurprising. Dismounted Fornosterine Knights pressurising them in melee. Greenway Garrison Footman actually going to defeat these Arthedain men-at-arms, so once again showcasing the benefits of the pikes. Yet another section of wall crumbles. It's not terribly surprising given the 4 artillery pieces the attackers do have, but there is a time surely where you have to throw caution to the wind and think that you've caused enough damage to your enemy's fortifications. Starting to turn the tide over here. The quality of the upper end Arthedainian swordsmen going to be too much for the Greenway in the long run, and there's not really any range support coming in here which would affect this battle. Some DUNEDAIN commanders nearby. There's a lot of Greenway units over here clogging up this street, but not yet being committed for anything in particular. Wardens of Tyr and Gorthad. One of the siege towers has made it. DUNEDAIN captains await them on the walls, however, so not the easiest position to take. Zelhain with his pikemen. I'm honestly surprised that they're still waiting here. I mean, we are moving at half speed, it's worth saying, so it's not going to be quite so bad as all of that, but these arrow towers are slowly but surely going to be getting a few kills here and there, and that is the sort of thing which can add up to make a real difference. It's a 4v4 as well, so the attackers can't rely on having just superior numbers in every respect. They're going to be reliant a little bit more so on the superior quality of the Arthedain infantry, if nothing else. DUNEDAIN peacekeepers, exactly the sort of thing which can really tip the balance against these basic Minhiriath units that are holding the line, but once again it's those pikes standing in the way, making life more difficult for Arthedain than maybe they were hoping for. Further back, DUNEDAIN Troll Slayers and Dismounted Knights Voluminous, but you can hear from the whistle there that those are crossbow bolts hitting them, so they're picking their targets reasonably well here, Cardolan, and Tharbad Warhammers on the front line are the sort of thing which even the mighty Dismounted Knights here will struggle with. That armour piercing a big deal. Many of the structures within the settlement now are burning. The stray hits from the artillery. Some armour-piercing arrows doing their thing, trying finally to silence these mercenary crossbowmen, which have been one of the main reasons why this Cardolan front line hasn't started to crumble already. Arthedain did claim the initiative here early on, but it has petered out a little bit. And another volley here coming in from the various projectiles. Minotaur, Roman Gatekeepers, DUNEDAIN Rangers biding their time for the defenders as well. Still these Cardolan units digging in, fighting their last surely, and in fact actually the Arthedainians are also shaken, tiring as well. Will fatigue have its part to play in this battle? Dismounted Fornos Knights, still these pikes fight on as well. Bandits moving forward to support, including another full unit of Greenway Garrison Spearmen just to block these Arthedain units from advancing further. And in fact, the numbers being what they are, this might be enough to actually defeat the Arthedainians here without some extra support. Greenway Garrison Spearmen still in reserve as well. Maybe not the most dependable reserve unit to have. Still nothing over here. What are they waiting for? I wonder. Another siege tower set up. I mean, they're certainly getting into a position now where... What have we here? I don't know. I don't know how Cardolan have allowed this to happen. The Dismounted Knights of Voluminous have slipped into the settlement. They've found a gap, but unfortunately for Y2K, they've also bumped into probably the singularly worst unit they could have in melee. Wardens of Tyr and Gorthad, skewering them pretty quickly. They will escape without terminal damage done, but Surely the lessons have to be learned here. The fact that there's a unit of knights now running around in the settlement, however, is a problem. Though those Greenway Garrison footmen are in the way, so I don't know necessarily. They've managed to secure this corner of the settlement essentially with that cavalry, but not really an awful lot else. That catapult is still menacing with its presence. There's another force over here from Arthedain moving in as well, but once again, pikes, this time the Wardens of Tirngorthad, the higher tier pikes, allowing Cardolan to hold on. I think actually now we will go up to normal speed. So far, I think, given the rather rough start to this battle, I think Cardolan have done reasonably well, but the attackers always seem to have a little bit more to give in these kind of situations, so I think especially if they can get their supporting units into positions like that, they will really fancy their chances. Cardolan in certain areas are starting to run a little bit low on forces to commit. More arrows being loosed, more javelins being thrown. And suddenly this section is looking very thin on the ground, next to non-existent in fact. More siege towers are being committed somewhere, still Gwathlo trackers firing away, maybe not the most sensational archer the game has to offer, but being a bit of a workhorse here for Cardolan as Arthedain continue to slog through this street, which has made corpses of many men so far. They've still got more crossbows left in reserve as well. Are we going to start to see the engagements over here? I think we are. There is a little bit more movement now. I don't think Arthedain can afford... Yeah, we're starting to see pushing in through multiple gaps. Cardolan, were they ready for this Arthedainian assault? I don't know. I mean, this is surely going to be the decisive moments of the battle that we're witnessing. Given that, I mean, this isn't a battle that's incredibly long. I think the fact that this choke point over here was completely undefended is a little bit of a problem. Zelhane's position being exposed now by some peacekeepers supported by some spears. Going to try and patch things up with some Wardens of Tirngorthad here. They can send some civilians forward as well, I suppose, to try and help plug the gap. Decent front line this with the Tharbad Warhammers, civilians once again, dismounted Knights of Anuminus. The support for the Arthedainian bodyguard units is definitely of a higher tier than the Cardolan ones, but then the big armour-piercing damage the Tharbad Warhammers can chuck out is another thing to consider. Dismounted Fornosterine Knights, having put the siege tower on the wall, they will immediately get back down off it, surround this position with the assistance of more men-at-arms as well. And that is surely going to be that, because the civilians will rout and the Tharbad Warhammers will be surrounded and destroyed. Wardens of the North loitering as well, so Arthedain's starting to turn the screw in certain areas. Attacking artillery getting into a decent position now. It's going to force some movement from some of these units at the very least. Very lucky here, the Minhiriel sharpshooters living a charmed existence with the artillery trying to rake shots right up their ranks. Gwathlo trackers out of ammunition, I suppose, being committed as an emergency infantry unit, which is only going to hold the line for a very temporary period of time. Arthedain now in place, supported with those pikes. Dunedain peacekeepers trying to do the damage as well. They'll butcher their way through Gwathlo trackers, no problem at all, but then most Arthedain infantry units will. Not really designed as an infantry unit. Dunedain rangers and crossbows, it's very difficult to keep track, of course, of this sort of thing. One of these ballistae has been destroyed. We haven't really seen the ballista as of yet. It's been moving around the battlefield, I suppose, but so far nothing too decisive. Cardolan continue to hold on in these areas. Cardolan's well, from the looks of it, Arthedain just now victorious over here, and only one unit of garrison spearmen remain. Going to be committed forwards as well. I don't really know why. They need support if they're going to achieve anything. One of the Cardolan generals falls, the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, which is over in this corner of the settlement, I believe, and you can see Arthedain now really pushing in. An all-at-once kind of approach from Tommy and Y2K, and given the quality of the infantry units that we're seeing, I think that it is going to pay off for Arthedain here. As well as Cardolan did in that slightly bitty middle section of the battle, I don't know whether it was enough to make up for the fact that that cavalry didn't really pull its weight, and now they're going to have to rely on infantry units facing foes that are way above their pay grade. DUNEDAIN peacekeepers mowing things down on the walls. Still some crossbows occupying sections of the wall as well, though, able to shoot right into the back of those Arthedain units. They'll get a lot of kills, but is it on high quality enough units? Is it on enough units? Cardolan may need to ask the impossible of their forces at this point, as Tommy the Wise also now moving in on the eastern side of the settlement with everything that he has, really. Fighting tooth and nail still, Cardolan, to try and win the pike war, but support was always going to be key there, and as their ammunition stores run dry, surely Arthedain will be able to claim the advantage. DUNEDAIN captains on the front line make this a fairly dicey affair, but Troll Slayers also help out from the other side, so a fascinating battle between brothers, really. Here's DUNEDAIN. Greenway Garrison footmen plugging the gap. They're going to be hit from two sides, two different units of men-at-arms. Surely at some stage we're going to start to see that Cardolan morale fragility start to play its part as well. Tharbad Warhammers advancing down the street. Smash the enemy. Victory is a distinct possibility. Some units even making their way to the town centre. Y2K's Knights of Anubis making a nuisance of themselves. Charging in. Some infantry units have even made it to the town centre, though not enough to take it short. 52 though. 52 heavy swordsmen should be enough actually to deal with these militia spears. Like I said, the Greenway Garrison spearmen really aren't the best at dealing damage to enemy infantry units. Not at all. Further afield. Gatekeepers. Oof. Clattering charge there. Again, rear charge from the surviving Knights of Anubis. This is always going to be a bit of a problem as well. It's always going to be questionable whether cavalry works for the defenders or the attackers in a siege like this, but when it does, it can prove to be such a good high value pick. Greenway Garrison spearmen holding the line, as they have done reasonably well actually throughout. That's really all Cardolan have been able to do in certain moments of this battle. The DUNEDAIN commanders trying to use them in the same way that we have seen those attacking cavalry units used within the settlements as well, but again, the more lightweight nature of single HP cavalry, especially the DUNEDAIN commanders with their lighter armour, always going to be questionable. DUNEDAIN scouts, Arthedain really just mopping things up on the outer areas of the settlement now, and more we're going to be starting to see a withering march towards the town centre. The ballista has got into position, shooting almost at point blank into the DUNEDAIN peacekeepers. I'm surprised actually the peacekeepers aren't turning around and silencing this artillery piece. The more damage it's able to do, and I mean artillery of course can very much be a concern from a morale perspective. Minotaur Roman gatekeepers simply holding the line against some Arthedain marksmen, but more of a token force until something more genuine can arrive. Now you can see that DF Mark, of all of the attacking armies, has been the one to be battered and bruised the most, but as is often the way when you're the first ones to begin an assault. Minotaur Roman gatekeepers also over here holding the line. Many of these crossbow halberd hybrids still standing. One of the better units you could ask for to be one of your last units left standing, but not when the odds are this far against you. Continued cycle charging in here from the Knights of Illuminus. Again, going after the Tharbad Warhammers, a key unit to dismantle at this stage of proceedings. Routing from the Greenway Garrison Spearmen. That's actually the first noticeable routing we've seen from Cardolan, so to be fair, their usual mental fragility hasn't actually been as big a part of this battle as maybe you could expect. DUNEDAIN Rangers up on the walls as well, shooting directly down into this Arthedain blob. But they're also being attacked by those Troll Slayers. Victory in this corner of the settlement. Arthedain continuing now to push through, claiming really all of the outer streets. Zelhain's positions overrun. And surely this means, yeah, we're starting to see, well, to be fair, those dismounted Fornost Rhine Knights were actually forced back out of the town centre, but it's going to be a temporary victory for Cardolan only. Plenty of routing units being hastily chased by Y2K's infantry. They will come back from routing as a result of this, but peacekeepers from this side, I mean Arthedain, simply getting some units to pressurise the town centre. I think probably the biggest concentration of Cardolan resistance at this point is over here, really, with the 2 units of gatekeepers. There's still the ballista, although they are now getting engaged alongside another unit of gatekeepers actually, but even here it's not going to be a winning prospect for the southernmost of the Arnorian petty kingdoms. Grey Company, we haven't really seen the Grey Company do a whole lot, but then they have got their swords drawn, so it's entirely possible that they have also been used effectively. Fast moving. I think only Cardolan generals have fallen so far. I might be wrong about that, but I haven't noticed the announcer be like, "Our foolish general has thrown his life away." Or maybe I'm just having my brain ooze out of my ears once again, and I'm simply forgetting. Gatekeeper's still there, so this side of the town centre is not under pressure yet, but then it doesn't really need to be. Arthedain have already really claimed the majority of the town centre. That, I think, is the last of the Cardolan generals. As the battle has marched towards its inevitable conclusion, it's been a fairly systematic victory in the end for Arthedain. That's surely that. I mean, yeah, the town centre is under the control of Arthedain at this point. There isn't really anything left as such. Just a few Greenway units that are being chopped down. 4 cavalry units remain, and yeah, they get skewered. What remains is pikes after all, even if there is only 3 of them. 7 Tharbad Warhammers. Bloodied. Going to make their last stand. Taking the odd hit or 2. There we go. Now his foolish general has thrown his life away. Though probably not the chances of victory with it. I think Arthedain will be fine from this point onwards. That is another... Well, yeah, this is really the only DUNEDAIN Rangers shooting at point blank. The ones at the north and the DUNEDAIN Peacekeepers, the arrow towers continuing to do their thing. Yeah, so pretty damaging that for Arthedain, really. There wasn't really enough of that, and I don't really know how effective the DUNEDAIN Rangers were. They are a crutch, of course, that the defenders can rely upon in this version of the game. Hasn't really been enough to save them on this occasion, though. Worthy victors in the end, though. Arthedain here. If you're going to back yourself with the kind of defensive cavalry numbers that the defenders decided to bring, you need to use them well. And that was not really the case. Too easy for Arthedain to shut down any value that they may have got. Which men-at-arms? Are they going to rout? They're eager, but getting surrounded by upper end pikes. A nice charge from the Troll Slayers as well. They are probably going to be the last Cardolan soldiers left fighting now. Although pretty rapidly they became shaken there, and they're a unit which doesn't really suffer as much as many of the other Cardolan units. They, as an upper tier unit, they will have more mental fortitude than that.
But there we have it.
It's going to be everything, yep. Everything else on the battlefield has fallen. To be fair, they actually squeezed out of being surrounded there, which does mean they can try and run, I guess, although they're running the wrong way because they're going to the town centre, of course. But they could theoretically have fled out of the settlement as a result of that. Would the cavalry have caught them? Probably, but worth a go. So there we have it. Like I said, I think a worthy victory this for Arthedain. I think from a Cardolan perspective, like I said, cavalry, if you're going to bring that much and that kind of expensive cavalry on the defence, you need to be able to use it well. And Cardolan weren't able to do that to the extent that they needed to win this battle outright. As for anything else they could have done, based on the numbers that remain, I would question whether or not their skirmishers were able to really lay down the gauntlet to the attackers. And a lot of that has to do with positioning. I mean, it was very clear from the outset that Arthedain were going to be taking that slowly approach, at least initially, knocking several holes in the wall, getting the gates out of the way with rams, that sort of thing. And yeah, like choosing better positions to try and defend, I think, was the key. They were a little bit too fragmented. Arthedain, chose the right positions to engage in, even if in that middle section of the battlefield, or the battle, I should say, not the battlefield. Cardolan were doing a decent job, but ultimately they needed more than decent, and it didn't prove to be enough. As for something else they could have exploited, I mean, Arthedain's assault was a little bit lopsided, like we saw. Like, DF Mark moved in more quickly, Joran not quite so all in as he was, but still supporting. Tommy the Wise and Y2K taking a little bit longer to move in. I mean, it ended up working out very nicely for them because they were well and truly set once they decided to commit everything. Plenty of holes in the walls, all of that sort of thing. You can't really argue with the results there, but lopsided assaults where some attackers move at different times has been the sort of thing to give the defenders victory in the past. Again, though, I think the main thing to take away from that is that Cardolan's positioning was still not as good as it could have been. And that's why, in the end, it didn't really end up making too much of a difference for Arthedain that one side of the settlement was being attacked before the other side was fully ready and set, but it is what it is. Let's see what did the damage for Arthedain. Wounds in the North doing nicely. Obviously in melee and at range they're always going to be a strong unit. Arthedain men-at-arms, I mean, Peacekeepers maybe less so from Tommy the Wise, but then his army was committed, probably the latest in terms of its all-out strength. Among the Arthedainian troops. One unit of Arthedain men-at-arms rating 150 kills, though. That's very good for a basic unit of sword and shield infantry. Dismounted 4 Nosterine Knights, you'd expect maybe that from them. As for Y2K's army, kind of a similar story here, although maybe he did commit a little bit sooner than Tommy the Wise. The Grey Company getting 286 kills, so we didn't see them, but they must have done a decent job with a kill count like that, and that's something else which Cardolan are always going to struggle to deal with. If attackers can use body-piercing projectiles to their advantage like that, you're in trouble. Dismounted Knights of Illuminus doing very nicely, of course, as did Tommy's, but that was in more of a defensive capacity than anything else, and then Y2Ks in particular were making a nuisance of themselves in the settlement as the battle reached its inevitable conclusion. Wounds in the North doing decently, more units breaking 100 here, including more Arthedain men-at-arms, so again, proving themselves that they are the superior basic units when compared to a lot of the units Cardolan had at their disposal. It does go to show that these basic human units, especially from the Western Kingdoms, they don't tend to be rated all that highly, and I would count myself among that number, but they do have a place and they are capable of really doing some decent work as long as you commit them against the right sort of things with the right kind of support. They're not miracle workers, but they can do a decent job. Joran's army, Dunedain Troll Slayers doing nicely. We saw the Troll Slayers and actually his marksman. He was really the only Arthedainian player to bring basic archers, and it ended up proving to be a decent pick because they ended up doing it quite nicely, and we saw them doing quite nicely as well. Dunedain Peacekeepers, one unit of them doing nicely as well, getting up onto the walls and forcing the enemy back. Rest of his army, 0 kills on the Dunedain scouts. Maybe the horse archers were a bit of a needless addition, but Yep, and DF Mark, the most aggressive of the Arthedain players, really. And it goes to show, because he has got the most kills, really, of any of these individual armies. Plenty of units breaking 100, a couple breaking 200 as well. No great surprises. Dismounted Knights of Luminous, dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights. So yeah, the stronger units breaking 200. DUNEDAIN Scouts doing better, actually. So his Horse Archers actually did prove to be a decent little pick. Arthedain Man-at-Arms also doing decently here as well. So you've got to give it to the Arthedain Man-at-Arms. I think this was a good battle for them. That armour upgrade as well. For most of these Arthedain armies, also proving to perhaps be something else to give them that little edge over Cardolan, all of which adding up to a fairly comprehensive victory. So yeah, big thank you to Tommy the Wise and all of the players for being a part of this battle replay and for sending it in. Always nice to see one of these standard Medieval 2 settlements show up every now and then. We've seen a few more of them of late, so it's interesting, sort of everything coming full circle in a way. As for what's going to be coming out next, I do have another siege battle, which I've already recorded the intro for, so I'll be doing that next. I've got a few replays, of course, which were sent to me by 2 times, another one by Tommy as well, which I think actually may be the very next one to come out. We may be on a bit of a marathon of his replays that he has sent in, if I'm not mistaken. And there's also a couple of free-for-alls which were sent to me a little while ago now by the Womb Raider. There is a historical Minas Tirith, which I do think will be coming out at some point within December, maybe at the turn of the new year as well. And yeah, also, there will be a channel update in some form or another once I can actually get around to recording it, because there is actually information that I can give now. I do have a much clearer idea of what's actually going to be happening. In the short term, though, the channel, in terms of its scheduling, won't really be changing. Moving into at least the first part of 2023, things will be as you were, so we will maintain the current schedule in its exact current form on the same day, so 2 videos a week, Wednesday, Saturday. And that's what we'll be doing at least in through the first quarter to a third of 2023, I think, but we'll see. Things can still turn around on a dime. I've learned to take nothing for granted over the course of this past year, and things could still change yet again, but for the time being, all that you need to know is that the schedule will not be altering as we move into the new year. But yeah, other than that, there's not really much else to say. So big thank you for Tommy, really being one of the people who have sent me a few replays of late, so I really appreciate that. Big thanks to all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.